Hello again. There was a glitch there, so I'm going to be sending this as probably two separate videos. I wish I knew what I was doing. Clearly I don't. So hit the wrong button and I'm back again. So what I was saying about DID is people with DID do not have that sense of unity of self. And because they don't, they experience themselves as split. Personality 1, personality 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And here's something that's really important to understand. In the vast majority of cases, adults with DID were severely abused numerous times in early childhood. And there's some research that highly traumatic childhoods, especially before the age of 6, seem to correlate with an increased likelihood of developing dissociative identity disorder. And it really makes sense when you stop to think about it. So imagine you're in a situation at your current age as an adult, and somebody is treating you abusively or horribly. You have options now that you didn't have when you were a little girl or a little boy. There are things you can do in real life. I'm not saying they're easy, but there are things you can do to deal with the abuse and the trauma. But imagine you're 2 or 3 or 4 years old and you're being emotionally or physically abused. You're helpless. In a real reality-based sense, you're in a very dependent, terrifying, helpless position. So one way to think of DID is actually, it's a strategy that you learned as a child to do the best you could in a god-awful situation. If the body's trapped, you learn to teach the mind to dissociate, to disconnect, to go to a different place. You learn to take the memories of that ongoing trauma and limit them in certain sorts of ways. And so one way to think of the etiology of dissociative identity disorder is that it's really a learned form of a type of self-hypnosis that children growing up in highly chronic traumatic situations learn to do to be able to not have a complete psychotic breakdown, to be able to hold on to reality. Now, one of the things we've explored in this course is psychological disorders are frequently when a person does the best they can to cope with something. DID obviously has all kinds of real life problems associated with it. When you're an adult and you have 15 different separate disconnected selves living inside you, right? It's going to be hard. Those different pieces of your personality can sometimes kind of run the show of you, if you know what I mean. And so it's going to be hard to relate to people in a consistent way. You'll be viewed as very confusing sometimes to other people. Could it be difficult to hold a job? Some of your personalities, the more adult-like ones, know about the showing up on time and meeting the demands of a job, and the more childlike personalities won't be on that same page. But even though it's a disorder, it was actually a way that we learned, some people learn as children, to deal with a horribly untenable situation. Now, children actually are natural dissociators. Think about your childhood and how easy it was to use your creative imagination to float off into an alternate reality. One of the examples I like to use is for those of you who as little kids played Manhunt on a summer night, right? When you were in that role of Manhunt, was that a separate reality from the rest of your world, sitting at the dinner table? And could it become all-consuming, right? So one of the beautiful things about childhood is actually children are natural self-hypnotizers. They live in a world of magic. The line between reality and fantasy is not a clear one, especially for young children. They have a natural ability to tune out things and to go to some other place in their imagination, in their fantasy. So adults with DID often grew up in childhoods where they used that childlike ability, right, to survive some pretty grim sorts of situations in childhood. But now you're an adult with multiple selves, and that's obviously going to create a number of difficulties. You're not going to have an inner experience of yourself as a meta, as a one, right? And one of the things you'll often hear is, and people with DID talk about themselves, they'll often sometimes not use the word I or me, they'll use we or them or us, which is kind of an example of that inner sort of disconnect that they're feeling. Now, there's been a lot of research on the different personalities that often emerge in DID. And one of the things that's pretty clear is there's usually one or sometimes more than one personality that is more like the organizer. It's more mature, it's more adult. It functions sometimes as a kind of parent or control mechanism to keep some of the more immature, infantile, childlike personalities in check. It sometimes has some control over when the alter personalities come and go. And I always kind of have thought of it. It's almost like a traffic cop who's, to some extent, the organizer is directing the flow of the other personalities. It is very common for there to be one or more alters that actually represent psychologically the qualities and the characteristics of the person who abused that individual. And I'm not sure if we talked about this early in the semester, but I think we did. Many of you have heard of something called the Stockholm Syndrome, which refers to a hostage situation that took place years ago in Stockholm, Sweden. And people were basically held hostage for a significant period of time. And what happened over that time was that some of the people who were being held hostage and in fear for their life gradually began to identify with the hostage takers, with the people who were holding them hostage, and began to kind of almost take on some of the identity and the belief system of the hostage takers. This is called, in psychodynamic theory, it's called identification with the aggressor, where when people are mistreating us, especially when we're young and vulnerable, we actually sometimes take on some of their characteristics and identify with some of those characteristics. And so with DID, we might see some of those alter egos basically containing some of the rage and aggression of the person who aggressed against you. There will also be other personalities that often are very childlike and very terrified, that hold the fear kind of separately in a separate alter, the fear that that child felt when they were being abused. And so, to me, DID is a tribute to the creativity of the human spirit, even under god-awful circumstances, to be able to try to do the best you can. So in real life, since DID is not nearly as common as many other psych disorders, in the couple of times in my career as a therapist when I evaluated a client who I thought had DID, my goal was to not treat them, because I really think that treating somebody with DID, you need to be specially trained. There are treatment centers. There's one, a very well-known one in New York City, that specialize in the treatment specifically of people with dissociative identity disorder. My goal when I would evaluate a client occasionally with what I thought to be DID was to do my damnedest to get them to the right therapist. It's just like, in medicine, sometimes people need specialists. Well, the same thing happens, I think, with DID. It's a complicated disorder, and it's a complicated disorder to treat. A therapist usually has to be very proficient with hypnosis, because it's using hypnosis as a therapist that you can begin to gain control over the different alters and begin to get them to a sense. One way to think about the goal of treatment for DID is to take those split off alters and bring them together to help them integrate and learn about each other. It is not unusual that in treatment for DID, new personalities will sometimes emerge that were not really obvious or maybe not even present early on in therapy. And that does not necessarily mean the treatment is not working. It may be that the safety of the therapeutic alliance is allowing certain personalities to begin to emerge. It may also be that as different alters begin to integrate, that leads to the formation of these other personalities. To say the obvious, the treatment implications for this is long-term psychotherapy. This is not like going through a rough time. This is not an adjustment disorder like we talked about early in this semester. But I think it's a fascinating disorder. There are a couple of videos out there on YouTube that really illustrate really well via interviews what the world experience is for somebody with DID. So maybe what I'll do is find those and just link you up to them, whatever that means. I link you up. Using all this uploading, downloading terminology now, I have no idea what it really means, but I'm trying. All right, so let me just look at my little cheat sheet here. Yeah, I think so. I'm putting the two videos together. This is about a 40-minute video, part 1 and part 2. Since I screwed it up, I'll send this separately. So again, I've emailed all of my abnormal psych students. You have my other alternate email address. Anything I can do, any questions, please feel free, reach out to me, and read the emails I'm sending to you, and watch this upload, whatever it is, and talk to you soon. Take care.